Welcome back to Proxam, everybody. And today we're going to be talking about the Craftworld Eldar Stratagems. So there's a lot of them, so this is probably going to be a pretty long video. And we're going to talk about which ones are worth taking. So honestly, the cool thing about Stratagems is you have them all available to you, and you do not need to use them if you don't want to. But they're all still available to you. So that means, you don't need to purchase them ahead of time usually. Most of them you can use just within the battle as the time arises. However, you can plan out certain strategies using certain stratagems that are powerful. And you can certainly use some stratagems before the game and plan your lists around certain stratagems that you might have. So let's go and dive right into it and see which ones are good. So in this video, we're going to be covering all the, basically the Craftworld stratagems. So I've excluded Harlequins in this because Harlequins are essentially their own army, and we're going to cover them later. I don't think it'd be justice to throw them in with the rest of Eldar because they actually play slightly differently than the Craftworlds. And there's basically 36 stratagems that we're going to be looking at of varying usefulness. And the thing about each and every one of these is that obviously some will be used every game. You're going to have some stratagems that you love and you're going to use every single game. I can think of a number of them off the top of my head that I've used in every game that I've played so far in with the new 9th edition Codex. And honestly, some will be a lot more situational. You might not use them much at all, but they could still be useful in those situations. So let's take a look. So the first one we're going to be looking at here is called Wrath of the Shrines. Essentially, this is a Biel-Tan exclusive stratagem, but it's very powerful. Basically, what you do is you choose a Biel-Tan Aspect Warrior unit, before you shoot or fight with them. And until the end of the phase, each time they make an attack and score a hit roll of a 6, and that's an unmodified roll, they score an additional hit. So this is insanely good for Biel-Tan. And in my opinion, it's a big reason to actually take the Biel-Tan Craftworld because the regular Craftworlds don't get this ability. They're not allowed to do this with anything other than tricking weapons. So basically, this turns Aspect Warriors into death-dealing machines. It works really well with Dire Avengers, Striking Scorpions, and Shining Spears because they have a lot of attacks. They generate a lot of cool extra effects, not so much Shining Spears, but it works especially well with Striking Scorpions because those extra hits are in addition to their normal ability of Sustained Assault. So what you can actually do is you can actually separate them because Sustained Assault attacks do not benefit from Mana Blasters, but Wrath of the Shrines additional attacks do benefit from Mana Blasters. So basically, for each hit that you roll, you're getting 2 additional hits with Striking Scorpions if you choose to use this stratagem. So really powerful stratagem. And again, works great with Dire Avengers 2 and Shining Spears to generate a bunch of extra attacks. And it's only 1 command point. So I think it's a steal. I think if you're playing Biel-Tan, you're going to be using this every single game. Sometimes multiple times a game, depending on the length of the game as well, and how many Aspect Warriors you have left. Okay, so Wire Weave Grenades are the next one, and these are a Shroud Runner exclusive, so you can only basically give them to Shroud Runners. And the problem with this ability is it's not the greatest outside of, Adelok lists, basically. And the reason why this is because when you're running Adelok lists, Shroud Runners are going to be a pretty staple unit in your army because of all the buffs they can give and stuff like that and all the bonuses they get with Adelok. But the thing is that they're not great in other lists. Now, this is a good ability, though, and here's why. It can essentially help you deny enemy charges for your units. So if you have Shroud Runners right next to another one of your units, you can use this ability to negate a significant part of the enemy charge. So, I mean, this is good, obviously, but it has its downsides. First, you can only use it once per turn. You can't use it on multiple units. 2, obviously, it costs command points. And 3, you need, Shroud Runners to be able to use it. But it does work very well when paired with Rangers because they have a wire weave net, and you can actually get -4 on charge rolls when both of these are used together, as well as a good amount of mortal wounds on the enemy unit. So I think this is really good in Adeloc, and you're going to be using it, a few times if you're running an Adeloc list per game. It's a useful stratagem for that. I just don't think it sees its way in any other, lists, to be honest, unless you're taking Shroud Runners, which, again, I only really think Shroud Runners are effective in certain Adeloc lists. So useful, but not the most prevalent stratagem. So the next one we have is actually, in my opinion, one of the best pre-game stratagems in the entire game. And the reason why is because this allows you to pick up to 2 units, either bikers or infantry, so it could be both. You can't use this on monster units. You can't use this on vehicles. But what you can do is you can choose 2 units that normally wouldn't have access to having any high mobility. So units like Wraith Guard are extremely slow. And if you want to use this ability to get Wraith Guard or Wraith Blades close to the enemy so that they can assault you, assault the enemy units before they're able to actually strike, this could be a great ability to do that. It also allows you to basically put units on the field, basically to have a chance to strike before the enemy can. So I like this with 2 units in the Craftworld Codex. I like this with Wraith Blades, and I also like this with Shining Spears. And I think both of these units are great with it. I think, to be honest with you, this stratagem is mostly for assault units. If you have some sort of plan to assault an enemy, basically turn 1 with something, I think this is a great way to go about it. Something that doesn't have sudden assault, that doesn't have any ability to get in. I also think this is useful with striking scorpions as well. So it really depends. You can put 2 units in there for 3 command points. I think it's definitely worth it, but it's something you have to plan your list around. You have to plan out that, yes, I'm going to, have my striking scorpions come in on turn 1 and maybe use striking scorpions in conjunction with the Ghost Walk psychic power to give +2 to my charge rolls so that I can essentially guarantee a charge turn 1 if I get, the Strands of Fate roll for it, which should be pretty easy, especially if you have Farseers. The problem with this basically stratagem is that if you don't plan accordingly, you can really end up with really isolated units that can't stand on their own too well. So if you don't plan accordingly, you can have a unit of striking scorpions way out, in an isolated part of the board. Yes, you'll take out your target, but then you're just left there. And if you don't plan correctly, that could be a big problem. So you have to be careful with it. You have to make sure you don't isolate your units without the proper support. But with that proper support and planning, Webway Strike can be one of the most powerful stratagems, not only in the Codex, but in the game. And up next is Warriors of the Raging Winds. This is a Samhain exclusive. So I really like this ability for Samhain, and it actually makes Samhain very, honestly kind of viable. Because it essentially turns the unit into a Harlequin unit that can, it's funny that Harlequins just get this ability for free, basically. But it allows things like Shining Spears, and this is really only, let's be honest, this is really only used for Shining Spears. Because they're the only biker unit that you would want in combat. Warlock Conclaves are too small. You don't really want them in combat too much. They're more of a support unit. Or Skyrunners, at least, with the Warlocks. The Skyrunner version, I should say, of Warlocks you don't want in combat. And basically it allows you to declare a charge in a turn you've advanced. And remember, jet bikes always advance 6 inches because of the Ride the Wind ability. So this can give you some really insane threat ranges here. 22 inches of movement plus 2d6 inches of charging, and that's not even accounting for Strands of Fate. You could literally charge turn 1 with this ability with a unit of Shining Spears. So I really like this ability. It's really awesome. It allows you to basically get the first strike on an enemy without having to worry where they are in the battlefield, because I'm going to move the entire battlefield's worth of distance to get to you. So really useful. I think obviously its only downside is that you have to, pick the same hand Craftworld, which I love the same hand Craftworld in a way, because I think their play style is very cool. I just don't think a lot of players gravitate towards them because they don't have a lot of variation in the units that they can basically be effective with. Shroud Runners, the new Jetbike unit, they don't synergize well at all with the same hand Craftworld, unless I'm missing something. I think Shroud Runners in general are better with hit and run style lists and lists that want to focus more on, preventing charges and not charging themselves. So, however, Warriors of the Raging Winds, for what it is for the same hand Craftworld, is an amazing stratagem. It allows your unit to charge insane distances. And honestly, most of the time when you do this, whatever unit is not going to be prepared for your assault. Most of the time anyway. So the next stratagem we have on the list is Treasures of the Eldar, and this essentially allows you to get an extra relic. So in Strike Force games, you can use this twice for a total of 3 relics. Now, I do think this is worth it in a lot of cases because we have a couple relics that are really, really useful. Phoenix Gem, Sunstorm, things like that are really useful just in terms of objective play and keeping your units alive. But I have to warn players, I would not overdo this stratagem. I would maybe use it once. And the reason why is because it can be a command point trap. If you spend 3 command points on this, yeah, you could get 3 great relics, but that means that you need 3 characters in your list. That means you need, 3 units that are characters to put these on. And honestly, they're unique. So you can't use relics more than once. You can't put 2 relics on a single character. So to be honest with you, you have your Warlock, you have your Farseer, not Warlock, Autarch. You have your Autarch, you have your Farseer. Sometimes you may have a Warlock or a Spirit Seer. Just in general, unless you have something specific planned out for your army, I would be careful about using this stratagem too many times. Remember, you're limited in the command points you have in the beginning of the game, so you want to make sure that you don't eat up through all your command points in the very beginning before the game has even begun, and you've even had a chance to refund some of the command points that you've spent throughout the game. So be careful with it. It is useful, but don't overdo it. Just like anything, just like putting a bunch of vehicle upgrades on your tanks and stuff. You don't want to go overboard with it because then you're losing your cost effectiveness. And the same goes with relics as well. You don't want to use too many. And here's a stratagem that I really like as well, but it's very situational because you only really can use it with Wraith units. So essentially what it does is you pick a Spirit Host, Wraith Construct model. It could be from any Craftworld. It doesn't just have to be from Iandin. And that model regains D3 wounds. But here's the thing. If it's within 6 inches of a Spirit Seer, it gains all 3 back instead of D3. I think the best way to use this, obviously, is in Wraith-centric lists, unless, the thing is with D3 is that if you roll a 1 or a 2, it's not going to be worth the command points. Regaining 1 wound is not worth it, ever. Regaining 3 wounds could very well be worth 1 command point. But to be able to do that and guarantee it, you need to be within range of a Spirit Seer, and Spirit Seers are only really going to be present with Wraith units. Because in general, you don't want to pay the extra points for the Spirit Seer unless you have a lot of Wraith units to benefit from that Spirit Mark ability. And there's another stratagem that has to do with the Spirit Mark ability as well. But essentially, this is really useful in Wraith-centric lists, extremely useful on Wraith Lords, decent on Wraith Guard. And in my opinion, for everyone out there listening, I know, some people might like the Wraith Knight. But the reason I actually haven't tackled the Wraith Knight yet is because I do not like the Wraith Knight. I think that it was once a good model back in the day when it came out. I think it was a terror. I don't think it's great anymore. I think it's actually not very cost effective, and I would argue that it's probably not that good in general in competitive play. And even in casual play, it just seems pretty lackluster to me. It's a big target, and it has to pay a lot of extra points for things that really shouldn't be a lot of points. To be honest, if you look at their weapons list and so forth, the points for their weapons are absolutely insane. You could easily spend over 500 points on this model. And the thing about this as well is that even though Tears of Ish only gives you, 3 wounds back, which is technically less efficient on a Wraith Knight, you have to pay a lot more for this ability. So you have to pay 2 command points instead of 1 command point if you want to use this on a Wraith Knight. So, overall, I just think it's less efficient to regain wounds on this thing anyway, because, to be honest, it's not really tougher than a Wraith Lord. It just has more wounds. So, in my opinion, not worth taking it on the Wraith Knight. If your Wraith Knight's at like 2 wounds left, you might as well and you're just playing for fun or whatever, you might as well just leave it and not even bother with it. The next one up is Unparalleled Mastery. So this essentially allows the Farseer or Psyker to manifest an extra psychic power that phase. Now, this sounds really good, right? On paper, this is like, I could use 3 psychic powers. But here's the thing. It doesn't allow you to cast the power you don't know. And most Psykers will only know as many powers as they have to cast, plus Smite. Okay, every Psyker does know Smite. So here's the thing. This can be useful, but it's very situational, and mostly, you're just going to be using Smite with it, so in that case, it's not really that good. Now, in some cases with, for example, your Vrain or the Ykarn, you could possibly be able to cast a 3rd power because they have special rules that allow them to gain knowledge of extra psychic powers. So technically, it can be very useful on, your Vrain, especially since she has a rule that essentially allows her to learn an extra psychic power once Psykers die within range of her, within 6 inches. So again, she's pretty good with it, but other Psykers aren't really that great with it, and it is situational. If you need a couple of extra wounds for Smite or something like that, it can be good, but to be honest, otherwise in all cases, Unparalleled Mastery sounds good on paper, but in reality, it's mostly just going to be used for casting Smite, and that's not really worth it. Okay, so for this next stratagem, we have the Avatar Resurgent. So, in all honesty, I think this stratagem is one of those that most players are almost never going to use. And that's because it's very situational, and it's very rare. And the reason why is because the parameters for you to actually be able to use this are very, it's not going to really happen a whole lot. So 2 things are needed to happen basically for this to be usable. It's only usable if your avatar is destroyed, 1, and it's only usable if your avatar is destroyed before it gets the chance to fight. So essentially what that means is if it gets charged by something in combat and destroyed, you have the chance to be able to attack back with +2 attacks. However, it is 2 command points, and to be honest, most people don't even take the avatar to begin with. So if they do take the avatar, the chances that somebody is going to charge into it to destroy it in close combat is extremely rare. And to be honest with you guys, I just don't see this happening that much. I guess it could happen in certain circumstances if you take the avatar, but again, they would have to charge into you, and most opponents are just not willing to do that if they have a choice in the matter. So, I just don't find it very useful in general. But if you do run the avatar, keep this in mind. If you do get charged and you don't get the chance to attack, you could use this to at least get your attacks in plus a little extra. So not a bad stratagem for that situation, but to be honest, the situation just really doesn't happen that much. So it's not going to be all that useful. Same thing with this one too. It only works versus Slaanesh. So this is the great enemy. Only works versus Slaanesh and only works in melee. So, I mean, this to me seems like more of a lore stratagem or a fluff stratagem than an actual useful one, because a vast majority of the time you're not going to be fighting against Slaanesh armies. But in the rare case that you are, it actually is pretty good in melee. It basically gives you Guide and Doom all at once. So it's really powerful, but it only applies to probably about maybe 5%, maybe even less than 5% of the armies out there. So, and it only applies to melee. So again, just not a very useful stratagem in general, but when you are facing Slaanesh, keep this in mind, because for one command point, it's basically Guide and Doom for melee units. Now, this next one's interesting, the Phoenix Reborn. So here's the thing about this stratagem. It's potentially very good, right? It's potentially has the ability to resurrect your Phoenix Lord. Here's the downside to it. It's only on a 4+. It's not like the Phoenix Gem where it's a 2+, where it's essentially almost guaranteed. It's a 4+, and it's essentially the same rules as the Phoenix Gem. You deploy the model after the phase, so it can't just be immediately attacked again to be destroyed immediately. So this is great if it goes off. And there's a big chance that you're going to fail and waste a command point on it. And honestly, the way the rule is written, you can't even use a command reroll on it. So it's kind of, it's really hit or miss. Either it's going to be really great or it's going to fail and do nothing. However, if you are running a Phoenix Lord and it gets destroyed, I would at least try it. I know a lot of people out there might say, well, I don't want to even risk the command point, but I would at least try it, because this is going to frustrate your opponent to no end if this goes off. And it's going to allow you, especially if you're using Baroth, who's basically the meta Phoenix Lord right now. If you're using Baroth, you could just use Cloud Strider and hide him for the rest of the game, and basically really throw a wrench into the enemy's plans. So again, it's only one command point. Yes, you could be wasting a command point on this and it do nothing. But on the other hand, you could be, kind of reviving your Phoenix Lord, and especially if it's Baroth, giving him the chance to get out of danger and to survive to the end of the game and deny that to your enemy. So overall, it's a risk, but one that, in my opinion, is worth taking. The next one on the list is Seer Council. So Seer Council is only usable if you have a unit of 2 or more Warlocks. But here's the thing about it. It basically, while that unit is within 6 inches of a Farseer, you get +1 to all your Psychic tests. Now, this is already worth it for 1 command point. Now, unfortunately, the second part of this special rule was extremely overpowered, and GW actually had to go back and fix it because people were cheesing it to no end. People were hiding the Warlocks behind line-of-sight blocking terrain and then using the Farseer to be, casting powers, but essentially untargetable by range attacks. And the Warlocks were untargetable, so you couldn't even shoot at either one. And it was just an OP combination. So essentially what they changed it to was an improved Lookout Sir. The Farseer can benefit from the Lookout Sir special rule, even if that Warlocks unit doesn't number 3 models or more. So you could essentially have a unit of 2 or even 1 Warlock giving the Farseer Lookout Sir. So what I mean by 1 is, I don't mean that you pick it as a unit of 1, because remember, the stratagem requires you to have 2 or more models to begin with. But if, for example, over the course of the game, that unit gets diminished, you could still use Lookout Sir. And again, if you're using a Farseer and you have a unit of Warlocks in your army, I highly recommend using this stratagem. It's only 1 command point. It gives all your Psychic powers a better chance of casting. It's going to be rare that your Farseer is too far away from your Warlocks to begin with. And Lookout Sir is not a bad special rule. So overall, I think this is a good stratagem to have. If you do have a unit of Warlocks in your army, it could really benefit you casting your Psychic. powers. Now, the next one, Resonator Shard. Now, this is an interesting one. It's very situational, and it's hard to plan ahead of time for because it only works with Rangers, and they have to be within 12 of an enemy unit. But check this out. If you have a little bit of pre-planning and you're running something like an Uthway list or something like that where you get bonuses with your Guardians, or Alatolik, which basically gives you a lot of Ranger-based buffs, essentially what you can do is you can place a unit of Rangers within 12 inches of an enemy unit turn 1 by using their advanced positions ability. And then what you can do is you can target that unit. You can use this stratagem and target that unit turn 1 to make sure all your D-Cannons, Doomweavers, and Shadow Weavers hit their targets. So I actually really like this stratagem, believe it or not, if you are using support weapons. If you're not using support weapons, it's useless, okay? You're not going to need it. But if you do have support weapons in your army, if you're running support weapons with your Uthway or Alatolik lists, this is a great way to get some rerolls in. And if you're running Uthway, you'd even get the Black Guardians special rule, which basically allows you to add +1 to hit as well. So you can actually combine these. You can combine the Black Guardians stratagem, use it on the support weapons, and you could use this basically on your Rangers. Because what you do is you use it in your shooting phase, and all you have to do is be within 12 of a unit of Rangers. So you can actually typically use both in the same turn to reroll your hits. And especially with the new changes to indirect fire, this is a great benefit for all units that use indirect fire. Doomweavers, Shadow Weavers, and D-Cannons are all more effective with this. And I think going forward, if you are, if any player is planning on using support weapons still, which there's a lot of players out there that are not using them since the nerf, but if you do plan to use them, Resonator Shard with Rangers is an absolute must to be able to reroll those hits. And the next stratagem on the list is the Starhawk Missile. Now, a lot of you guys are going to look at this and say, this is probably not something I'm going to use that much. And the truth is that you're really not going to use it that much unless you have a single model with an Eldar missile launcher on the battlefield. And that's going to be a little rare. But if you have, a Warwalker, anything really with an Eldar missile launcher, and this has to be a single Eldar missile launcher. It can't be a twin Eldar missile launcher. Because a twin Eldar missile launcher is just going to be better than this anyway. You don't want to have to sacrifice the extra shot. But if you do have one, this can be pretty good against flyers. It does an average of 4 mortal wounds to flyers. You only need 1 hit roll. It automatically wounds. And that could be really good at dealing some wounds to flyers. It's decent, but I'm going to tell you right now, most of the time it's not going to warrant a command point. However, there is an exception. If you do happen to have a missile launcher in your army that would be a good target for the stratagem, it's good against Tyrannid. And I know I've been saying that a lot, but strangely enough, a lot of things in the Eldar Codex actually do decently against the new Tyrannid stuff. Now, the new Tyrannid flyer, I believe it's the Harpy, has an invulnerable save, has -1 to hit, is very hard to kill, and this basically ignores it because it does mortal wounds. So this is an automatic 4 wounds to a Harpy. So you're probably going to be hitting it on 3+, and that's just going to cause 2d3 mortal wounds. And that's it. And these mortal wounds, by the way, because they're a damage roll, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe because it's a damage roll, you can use a command reroll on it. So if you roll really bad on it, you could use a command reroll to reroll that dice, which isn't bad. So I think that's pretty effective against that particular model and models like that. So I'm talking about flyers that are pretty tough, have good armor, and also have a decent invul save. This weapon is good at getting guaranteed wounds on it. Now, unfortunately, you can't use it multiple times because it is a stratagem, but it is useful, and I think it's decent. I don't think it's the greatest thing in the world, but it's a great way to get those last few wounds on something if you don't have it, especially the Harpy. I definitely wouldn't plan on using it in a list, though. I wouldn't revolve a list around it or anything like that. Now, this next stratagem called Shield Discharge, I have to say, when I first read this, I thought it may be okay. But then I read the second part of it, which means that the model can no longer benefit from the Serpent Shield or Wave Serpent Shield. So let me just tell you right now, just to get it out of the way, this stratagem is absolutely worthless, okay? First of all, the effect isn't that good. The enemy unit cannot fire Overwatch or set to defend. Each time a model in that enemy unit makes a melee attack, subtract 1 from the attack's hit roll. Okay. But here's the problem. You have to be within 12 of that model, so your Wave Serpent has to be very close to that enemy unit. Second, you lose the ability after you use it. Third, the effects aren't really that good, okay? So, and the fact that you lose the ability afterward makes this ability and this stratagem absolute garbage. So, for one, the only other way you could use this is with a squad of Storm Guardians who have the Serpent platform. And if they use it, they lose their 5+ invul save. And they lose their other ability, which makes 1s and 2s auto-fail to wound them. So honestly, to be honest, it's really not useful in any sense. And it's going to be very, very, very situational. So you're basically only going to use it in one way. And that is if the Wave Serpent is almost dead. It has like 1 wound left. And even then, it's debatable whether or not this is going to be effective. To be honest with you, I don't know about you guys, but I would rather have a 5+ invul save, even on a Wave Serpent with 1 wound left, because that means if a stray missile launcher hits it, or some other form of heavy anti-tank that you're not going to get an armor save against, I would rather have that invul save so that your opponent might have to shoot something else at it. I would rather have that than this ability. So overall, I think Shield Discharge, pretty weak. I think it was way better before where it did mortal wounds. It's a shame that they got rid of that. I think that was a big mistake. I think, honestly, how this rule is written now, it's just not effective. This next stratagem, on the other hand, could be good. Now, the thing is this basically gives your Exarchs in the army relics. So for each command point you spend, you get 2 relics that you can allocate to Exarchs in the army. And these Exarchs have specific relics that are categorized in the relic section of our codex. So this is worth using once, I think, but only if you have a unit of Swooping Hawks. And here's why. If you look at all of the other relics, and I have a video on relics that you can check out on my channel, and which ones are the best and kind of which ones are good and kind of an overview of all of them. There's really only one Exarch relic that's worth it, and that's called the Phoenix Plume for Swooping Hawks, which essentially gives them fortune, but it's on all the time. It's like permanent fortune, and it gives the Exarch a 4+ invul save. If you have a larger unit of Swooping Hawks, I absolutely recommend using this stratagem, for sure. You could combine this with Winged Evasion, which will give them even a greater chance of evading damage, and your Swooping Hawks can actually become quite hard to kill for the enemy. And this is exceptionally annoying on Swooping Hawks because they can also use Skyleap to get out of trouble. So I recommend this if you have a big unit of Swooping Hawks, take this stratagem. It's worth every single command point, it's only 1 command point. And as a bonus, it gives you another relic to put on another Aspect Warrior Exarch. Although, to be honest, pretty much all of them suck except for this one, the Phoenix Plume. But hey, it's better than nothing. A lot of times, if your Exarch, for example, if you have a Shining Spear Exarch, giving him the, I can't remember what it's called, but giving him the Shining Spear relic could be useful. But hey, it's free, so why not, right? And so the next stratagem on the list is Pathfinder Ambush. So this is only for Adaloc armies. And basically what it is it's a cheaper version of Forewarned, but it's for less command points and it only affects Rangers. And if they happen to be in Strategic Reserve, they can be basically deployed in response to enemy reserves when you use this. However, to be honest with you, I don't think it's ever really that useful to put Rangers in strategic reserve. If you do put them in reserve to benefit from the secondary objective that the Eldar have, the Ranger one, that basically means that if you're in an enemy deployment zone, you can get bonus points for, I think it's scouting or something like that. It could be useful, but you wouldn't want to use the first part of this ability because you have to be outside of 9 inches from enemy models and units. So the first part of this ability isn't really that good. The second part allows you to basically shoot at that enemy unit with the Rangers as long as they're within 18. I think this is okay, to be honest. But to be honest with you, Rangers aren't really meant to deal damage. And even if you're running an Atalotic Craftworld, your Rangers aren't going to be doing most of the damage. They're going to be scoring points for you. The big damage dealers are going to be things like support weapons, fire prisms, war walkers. Those kind of things are going to do most of the heavy lifting for you in an Atalotic list. And your Rangers are really just there to mess with the enemy and score points. So really, honestly, it's an okay stratagem. It's basically a cheaper version of forewarned in most cases. It's just, to me, it's not really that effective because Rangers don't really deal that much damage with their shooting. Now, Phantasm is basically the old Eldrad redeployment ability. So if anyone ever knows this ability that Eldrad used to have, he basically allowed you to redeploy units on the battlefield. And honestly, this was one of my favorite things to do to opponents. And this is still one of my favorite things to do to opponents. So basically what it does is it allows you to redeploy 3 units in your army anywhere you want, basically, within your deployment zone, following all mission rules and things like that. But the bonus is you can also put them into strategic reserve without spending additional command points. So you can put 3 units in strategic reserve and only use 2 command points for it instead of the normal amount. So this allows you to put, really highly powered units into strategic reserve without having to, spend the extra command points for them. And it's just absolutely great for playing mind games with the opponent and messing with their strategies. And to be honest with you, unless you're facing another Eldar player, there's not a lot of redeployment abilities out there. So this can really force your opponent to think you're going to be, attacking one side of the board. And what you can do is you can move your units to the other side. And because you will usually have a greater mobility than your opponent, you can basically outclass him in a lot of ways. The next stratagem is called Multifaceted Mind. So basically what this does is it allows a psyker in your army, after performing a psychic action, to cast 1 psychic power that phase. So normally you wouldn't be able to cast any psychic powers if you did a psychic action, but this stratagem allows you to at least cast 1. This could be useful. It just won't happen a lot, so don't expect to use it a lot, but it could be useful if you want to do something like Eldritch Storm or something like that. Now, Linked Fire is actually a really awesome stratagem. So basically what this does is if you have multiple fire prisms and you use this stratagem, you can choose one of the fire prisms to be the target of the stratagem. And for each fire prism within 12 that contributes to it, you get 2 extra shots, and all of your shots ignore invul saves. So obviously this is really good against big targets because it ignores invul saves. And a lot of the big targets now, like Tyranids, big tanks and stuff like that, a lot of them actually have invul saves. So the Fire Prism is really good at basically locking down these kinds of targets and destroying them. Especially with the Tyranids with their new synaptic imperatives, which give them invul saves. It's really effective at neutralizing this, and there's a lot of tough Tyranid creatures in the new book that are very hard to deal with, and this is basically one of the better ways to do that if you are running Fire Prisms. And as I discussed in a previous video, Fire Prisms are actually kind of the premier choice for long-range Eldar anti-tank, especially with the changes to the corresponding Night Spinner. So Linked Fire, great way to deal with the new Tyranid books. If you have Fire Prisms, you can't really go wrong with it. Lightning fast reactions is kind of an ability that Eldar share with Dark Eldar as far as the stratagems go. Essentially what it is it enemies have to subtract 1 from all of their hit rolls against that chosen unit in your opponent's shooting or fight phase. So you have to choose either one. It can't apply to both. But really this is better used on big units like Wraithguard or Wraithblades because it essentially makes them that much tougher. And while it may seem better to use it on a faster, a faster unit like Aspect Warriors or something like that, it's really helpful to have a working knowledge of how much damage your opponent's shooting is actually going to do. Because here's the thing. If your opponent's shooting is going to, on average dice, overkill your unit, there is absolutely no point to use this. You only want to use this when it's going to prevent the squad from being wiped out. Because if not, it'll just end up being a waste of command points. So a couple of great things to use it on are units like Wraithguard, who the enemy are going to have to shoot with a lower number of shots. This will improve your chances of surviving those attacks much more. And to be honest with you, bigger units, because bigger units will also benefit more from this than a smaller unit would. Because most of the time, if you have a smaller unit and the enemy can draw line of sight to that unit, we play a very squishy faction. They're probably going to die. If a unit of, for example, Tactical Marines draws line of sight on a unit of Warp Spiders, and maybe the opponent has several units that are drawing line of sight to those Warp Spiders, there's no reason to use this ability. I know you may want to save those Warp Spiders, but chances are those Warp Spiders, if they're being shot at by multiple units, are going to just die. Just let them die. Save this for your bigger, tougher units that are going to be targeted with, weapons that have less volume of fire, but that are more powerful. So plasma guns, melta-guns, last cannons, missile launchers, those kind of things. If you can make it harder for your opponent to actually hit those attacks, then you can actually make very good use of this ability, and you can make tough units like Wraithblades that much tougher. So matchless agility is the next stratagem. Now this is pretty good, but it's debatable whether or not you should use it every turn. And it's debatable whether or not it's actually worth it on a lot of Eldar units that we have. So for example, it's not very helpful if you use it in terrain, because if you use battle focus in terrain, you have to subtract 3 from the distance. So you'll only be moving 3 inches even with this command point. Stratagem, I mean. But you'd have to waste a command point for it. So this is really only useful to guarantee creating enough distance to prevent charges or to get yourself out of line of sight. So if that 3 inches through terrain is going to move you out of line of sight, if it's going to move you on the other end of obscuring terrain, yeah, it's worth the command point to save that unit. However, to be honest with you, it's not going to be useful on every unit. Jet bike units and Warp Spider units, for example, cannot make any use of this. Warp Spiders get 2d6 on their rolls. Being able to move up to 6 inches isn't going to be that great unless you roll really bad on their battle focus. Normally, they can move 7 inches on average rolls, and jet bike units always move 6 on advanced rolls. And to be honest with you, it could be a little bit useful for jet bikes, being able to battle focus 6 inches, but in most cases, it's just not going to be that great, unless you're playing a very hit-and-run centric game, and for some reason your jet bikes are, needing that extra, that extra range to be able to battle focus. But in most cases, not going to be useful on jet bikes or Warp Spider units, because to be honest with you, it doesn't allow for that much more additional movement than they already get normally. And the next one is Martial Citizenry, and this basically allows Guardians to reroll hit rolls of 1 in the shooting or fight phase. I think this is basically one of the most redundant stratagems that Eldar have access to, because if you are taking Guardians, they already get rerolls of 1s when they're fighting near objectives anyway. So, in my opinion, this one's rarely worth it, and to be honest, it's not that big of a buff to begin with. So all in all, I say on this one, take a hard pass on it. If you do have a unit of Guardians and you want to buff it, there are much better ways to do it. There are much better stratagems to do it with. Bladestorm comes to the top of my head. So I would just leave this one at home and kind of forget about it because it's probably not going to be that much of a use. Even in lists with a heavy amount of Guardians, it's just not really that great. Now, Inevitable Fate is a Ynnari-specific stratagem, and it's pretty good. It's great at finishing off damaged units. It gives +1 to wound when the enemy unit is under half strength. This is going to happen more rarely than you think, but when it does happen, it helps to guarantee just a little bit more that unit is going to be destroyed in combat. So it can be useful for softening up targets before charging in with your other units. And because the Ynnari can actually take Dark Eldar units, this is really helpful with a lot of the Dark Eldar units that the Ynnari can take, like Witches and Incubi and units like that. So pretty good. It has some good synergies with Dark Eldar and Eldar units. You can sometimes use the Eldar units to shoot and then charge in with the Dark Eldar units, to kind of finish the job, so to speak. Guided Wraith Sight is another Wraith-centric stratagem, and basically this gives you a global spirit mark. So this allows Wraith units to reroll 1s to wound anywhere on the board. So this is great. This allows a little bit more flexibility with your Wraith armies. You don't have to keep them so tight together, all close to your spirits here. It allows you to play more to the objectives, more to the style of games that 9th edition has brung, and kind of gives Wraith units a lot of flexibility. So, they don't have to be so close to Spirit Seers to be able to benefit from the Spirit Mark ability, which honestly is really great. Rerolling 1s to wound is fantastic, especially with their high strength weapons, are mostly going to be wounding on 3+ and 2+ anyway. So all of the misses that you have, especially with the ranged variant of Wraithguard, are going to be re-rolled onto wounds. So it's essentially a free doom. Think about it that way. So I really like this ability. And it's something you're definitely going to use pretty much if you're running a Wraith-centric list on most turns. Now, this next one, Grenade Pack, honestly, I think it's much worse than the old Grenade Pack from last edition Codex. And I know, that's just my 2 cents on it. I had this whole thing planned with Swooping Hawks last Codex, but obviously the Codex is much better, but this is something that took a hit. Now, here's the thing about the Grenade Pack. It's exceptionally hard to actually pull off on Swooping Hawks. And this is because if your enemy knows about this stratagem, they will just position themselves 14 inches away from you. And at that point, you have no ability to actually use this Grenade Pack. How the rules were written before, you didn't necessarily need to move over a unit. And you had all these different ways of doing that and still shooting and stuff in the last Codex. That's no longer the case. So it's become pretty easy to avoid it. Now, here's the benefit of this, though. If you position your Swooping Hawks correctly a turn before, and you position them in a way to where if the enemy tries to capture an objective, you can then move over them, drop your grenades, shoot, and then sky leap somewhere else, yeah, that's a great way to use them. And that would be basically the premier way of using this stratagem. But unfortunately, it's just a little bit more difficult to use now. And in general, I think there's better stratagems, to be honest, that can be used with the command points. But, I mean, again, if you have a large unit of Swooping Hawks, a unit of 10 or something like that, this isn't a bad way to go because getting mortal wounds on 4+, that's not bad at all. And it actually will, on average, cause about 5 mortal wounds. For 1 command point is a pretty good deal if you can actually successfully get this off. And Fusion Charges is one that's specific to Fire Dragons. So basically, it's a great defensive tool, right? You don't want to use this offensively, really, because when are you ever going to want to charge Fire Dragons into something like a vehicle or a Dreadnought or something like that? But if a Dreadnought or other type of combat-style walker charges you and they fail to kill your unit, if you have at least 1 Fire Dragon left, you can use this ability to kind of get some last minute damage in and kind of get the last laugh, right? So you never really want to be the one charging in unless it's like the last possible option. You have like one fire dragon left and it's a last ditch effort to kill that vehicle. It could be useful, but in most cases, you're going to want to use it defensively. If you are charged by something like a warwalker, or not a warwalker, sorry, a dreadnought or something equivalent like that. That's a vehicle. So, forewarned basically allows a unit within 12 inches of a friendly Farseer, has to be a Craftworld unit, to shoot a unit coming from reserve. So this is 2 command points. It's a little steep in points, but it's a very good defensive stratagem, and it's really actually good at preventing assaulting units from getting within that initial assault range to your shooting unit. Basically, it says that you could do this, but there's going to be consequences for it, which is I'm going to shoot at you. Unfortunately, this is not so effective against ranged deep strikers in most cases, because ranged deep strikers can just choose to position themselves outside of 18 inches to avoid being shot at. So it's not really that effective against range-oriented units, but can be very effective at taking out assault-oriented units that aim to get into combat right after they deep strike in, which is very possible for several armies out there, including ours. And then we have Fire and Fade. So Fire and Fade is the old kind of rule that basically allows you to move 7 inches after shooting. It's essentially battle focus on steroids. It's not as affected as much by difficult, ground or terrain. And it helps keep your important models that don't have battle focus safe behind terrain. So I'm thinking Warwalkers, Fire Prisms, Wraithguard, stuff that doesn't have battle focus but needs to be out of line of sight. Can benefit greatly from this, even if you don't necessarily, basically, even if it's a little bit steeper in command points and you won't necessarily use it every turn, it's a good option for those units to have and can really help you in the first couple turns of battle to protect them until, they can do their damage and they can be effective. And then, at that point, after that, the threat should be diminished or gone. So you won't really have to continue to use it turn after turn after turn. Now the next is Fire and Reposition. So this is only for outcast units. It basically means that if they use their battle focus through terrain, they don't subtract the extra 3 inches. So, it can help outcasts get out of trouble a little easier, but in my opinion, I think there's better ways to spend command points. And I think that outcast units already have a lot of ways to prevent charges. So in my mind, the command point is better spent elsewhere. Feigned Retreat is basically, if your Eldar unit that gets charged survives the charge, manages to survive, it'll get a chance to charge or shoot back. Now, the problem is that most of the time you won't survive. If something serious charges your unit, unless they're a really tough unit like Wraithblades with a bunch of buffs, they're not actually going to be able to survive the charge. So unfortunately, it's very rare to be able to actually use this to its full potential. Now, if you do use it, if you do manage to find a situation where you can use it, don't use the 2 command point option. Most of our units are actually specialized for either shooting or close combat and don't necessarily want to be in both at the same time. So only use the 1 command point. If it's a shooting unit, use the shooting. If it's an assault, use the assault. And that way you save some points, some command points. Now, this next one is actually a Uthway exclusive. It's a Discipline of the Black Guardians. This is a really fantastic ability on support weapons and basically helps them negate the new penalties to indirect fire. And it really actually combos very well with the Resonator Shard stratagem, with Rangers. So basically this gives your support weapons 3+ to hit with rerolls to hit. But, of course, the catch to this is, in total, it's going to cost you 2 command points, and it's also going to mean that you need a squad of Rangers within 12 inches of your intended target, and you need your support weapons to be in range of that target as well. So this can work very well, but you need to have the right positioning and strategy to make it effective and make it useful. Otherwise, it just kind of falls apart. If any one of those aspects doesn't work, it's not going to work that well. and you're going to lose out on a lot of the benefits. Now, Eldritch Storm is something that came out a while ago. It was released as part of a leak. And, God, here's the thing about Eldritch Storm, everybody. It's 3 command points. It does 3 mortal wounds to each unit within 6 of the marker you place. And you can get +1 to the mortal wounds for each Farseer that use the Empower Psychic action, that Psychic phase. But here's the thing about that. It actually prevents your Farseers from casting other powers. And in most, if not almost every case, that's going to actually be worse for the Farseers than casting their regular powers. Now, the D3 mortal wounds, you're within units within 6, right? So most of the time, to be honest with you guys, opponents aren't going to crowd all their units together like that. So you're rarely going to get a great chance to use this stratagem. At most, you might get 3 units, and that's being generous. Typically, you're going to only get 2 units with this. That's only 4 mortal wounds, and at that, it's required to have a 2+ roll on each unit. So you may even roll a 1-on-1 and kind of miss out on some mortal wounds. So I actually don't think Eldritch Storm is worth it in most cases. I think unless your opponent is really just bunching up his entire army, it's just really not worth using. Very situational and not useful. So, Champion of the Eldari is an extra Warlord trait. Basically gives another character in your army another Warlord trait. This is fantastic with really good Warlord traits like Seer of the Shifting Vector to get extra command points throughout the battle, or Fate's Messenger to be extra tough. And this can be used in combination with your Craftworld traits as well. So, I think it's a really good stratagem, but be careful because it could be a trap to put too many points into it. So I would actually only probably use this at most one other time. That's just me personally. It can basically become a trap to choose to cast it, or use it more than once, because that would be 3 command points. And honestly, I know that you get a lot of command points to start out a battle, but we don't have that many, and there's already so many other great stratagems that we can use to get the most out of our command points. So be careful with that. Now, Bladestorm is probably one of the best abilities and stratagems for the entire army, and here's why. Basically, it turns shuriken-based units, which are a vast majority of our units, into absolute death machines. And I talked about this in a previous video, but Dire Avengers set up correctly with this stratagem can basically just absolutely demolish big targets too. Things like Dread Knights, Tyrannid creatures that you wouldn't think would normally be susceptible to Dire Avengers, which are supposed to be an anti-infantry unit, will absolutely get shredded with the combination of Bladestorm, Hail of Doom, Far-Flung Craftworld trait, and a couple of other buffs. Will just absolutely shred anything that's even remotely within the 12 to 15 wound range. So really good. I recommend using this as much as you can, whenever you can. However, it does fall off on smaller sized units. So I wouldn't actually recommend this on smaller units unless it's in the very late game and you need to just get a couple more wounds on an enemy target, because you won't get the maximum amount of value from it, as it's just better with larger units in general. Things like Wind Rider jet bikes with shuriken cannons, things like that. And we're coming to the end here. I know this was a big video, but Battlepsychers is the next one. And here's the thing about this one. It's a lot of command points. It only works as long as the unit has 4 models in it. And for Warlocks, that's Warlock units. And it's often not worth it. Being able to use both of the powers, Runes of Battle power effects isn't as good as it seems, because oftentimes it's just way too situational to be useful. Now, one of my viewers actually brought up a good point about Mind War and a Farseer, that you could use the Embolden to boost the Farseer's leadership +2 and Horrify on an enemy character to negate his leadership by -2. Use this stratagem to do that, and then use Mind War on the enemy character. Now, that's a really great idea. I think that's, when I saw that, I was, obviously really excited about it because, you know, this brings me back to the days of old Mind War where you would just destroy characters pretty much instantly because Farseers had such such a greater leadership than they did. But I think there's a lot of investment in this, and I'm not sure it's worth the command points and the investment in general, but it's something you can use. So if you're thinking to yourself, well, I really want to be able to use this Battlepsychers ability, that is one way to make good use of the command points, even if it might be a big investment. Now, the last one, Avengers of Azurin. So this allows Dire Avengers to shoot twice, as long as the unit is under full strength. So when it's at its full potential, when you have 10 Dire Avengers and one dies, so you have 9 Dire Avengers in a unit, this can be absolutely devastating with the right build. But when it's not, when the unit is very damaged at 3 or 2 models, it's not really worth using at all. So it's kind of an all or nothing stratagem that could be useful, but could also be kind of worthless, depending on how big your Dire Avenger unit is. So in conclusion, I think most of the stratagems on this list are very situational, won't be used that often, but a few on the list are going to be used every single game and are actually needed for your armies to play at maximum potential. So the correct use of stratagems can really make or break a game for you. If you're wasting command points on stratagems that won't be beneficial to you, you probably won't have enough command points when you need it for the stratagems you need it for. So you have to plan ahead and make sure that you have enough stratagems and command points throughout the game to be able to do what you're going to do at all stages of the game. Okay, everybody, that's going to be it for this one. I hope you learned something from this video, this overview on stratagems. I'll see you all next time. As always, thank you so much for watching and supporting, and peace out. I'll see you guys later. Have a good one.